Welcome to CISO Chair, where true cyber leadership, real stories, and industry insights take center stage. This is your seat at the table.
For every human being inside your organization, there are 82 others you have never onboarded, never reviewed, and probably can't see. They are machines, identities, service accounts, tokens, API keys, workloads, and now AI agents. 82 to 1. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. 88% of organizations, the definition of privileged users still applies solely to human identities, even though 42% of those machine identities already hold privileges and sensitive accesses. It's not a forecast. That's CyberArk's 2025 identity security landscape. Attack surface didn't grow. It went invisible. Today, we are going to make it visible again. Welcome to CISO Chair, the podcast where we go beyond titles, decisions, trade-offs, and the lessons that actually shape security leadership. I'm your host, Ashish, with 70 plus years of experience in cyber risk governance across Fortune 500 companies, and these days, deep in AI governance. One quick thing before we start today's proceedings, because it is relevant to exactly the kind of conversation we are about to have. There's a difference between following cybersecurity and learning from people who lead it. So I've just launched the CISO Share Brief. It takes every conversation on the show with some of the field's most accomplished leaders and distills it to few things actually worth your time. The sharpest takeaways, the decisions behind them, the mistakes you wouldn't have to repeat, and the one-liner you wish would have said first. No noise, no filter. Here's the catch. The full brief lands in subscribers' inboxes only. The feed only ever sees fragments. So if you lead security, privacy, or technology, or are an enthusiast, feel free to subscribe to brief.cisochair.com. Today's episode is going to be perfect one to see distilled and take it forward from here on. So let's get into it. My guest today operates at a scale most of us only read about. Shobha Jagatpal formerly led cyber and risk functions at Morgan Stanley as managing director with close to 25 years of experience spanning across security engineering, architecture, identity, cryptography, application security, governance, cloud, etc. Built across Walmart, RSA, Oracle, Accenture, Wipro before Morgan Stanley. She also holds a master's in software systems from BITS Pilani that makes her perfect for today. Or rather, she served as a co-chair for Open Source Security Foundation Public Policy Committee, working directly on US and EU open source legislation frameworks like SBOM and SLSA. She also had founded an internal cyber club program and mentored women into the field through InfoSec Girls and Winjar, WINGA. Shobha, thank you so much for accepting this invite and welcome to CISO Chair.
Thanks for having me, Ashish. I look forward for the opportunity to share my perspective in this podcast.
So CyberArk's 2025 research puts it at 82 machine identities per human with 42% holding privileges or sensitive access. From where you sit, or from your perspective, running cyber and risk functions at any global enterprise or maybe even a bank for that matter, is 82 to 1 conservative or generous? And what's the real multiplier inside a financial institution?
So I would definitely say it is incredibly conservative number. The real ratio may be somewhere around 4 to 8 times more than the ratio that you just shared. So typically in any large financial institution, the machine identities or non-human identities outnumber in several orders of magnitude the human identities. So imagine an application, a simple application, right? It could have at least been built on a 3-tier stack or 4-tier stack, and it could have an API to use. It would have a certificate, a service account, or may call an automation script. It could be related to a workload in the cloud. It could have a database connection or a messaging bus that it may have to use for various purposes. It can have schedulers. And now on top of it, AI agents, which itself will act as a component, right? So clearly the number is not growing linearly, it is compounding. And in most of the scenarios, the human headcount will remain flat while the machine population in terms of the identity and various infrastructure resources will grow exponentially. So I think that's the big realization or takeaway, that We are living in a world where digital identities are dominant in terms of the identity population than the human identities.
The same survey found 70% of leaders say identity silos are the root cause of cyber risk, and 68% lack identity controls for AI. At your scale, what was the single hardest category of non-human identity to even to even discover, let alone govern?
So let's think about it by taking an example, right? So typically in any scenarios, a user will have access to various SaaS applications. It could be with Google or Microsoft, not the actual business scenarios, but it could be related to some productivity tool usage, could be a calendar assistant or an agent to summarize an email or something like that. So that action would actually require OAuth token to be leveraged by the ecosystems who are part of that ecosystem. And it is very, very difficult to find through the standard network asset scans because they exist entirely at the API to API trust within the cloud, right? So I think one thing that I can think of which is hardest non-human identity that is can be found is these OAuth tokens, which are granted to employees to third-party SaaS tools. We can call it as shadow SaaS.
And I was actually looking at some other statistics and reports. Guardian's 2026 report found 29 million new hard-coded secrets exposed on public GitHub in 2025, and that 64% of credentials valid back in 2022 are still unrevoked. Where does governance actually break in your opinion? Is it discovery, ownership, or the revocation muscle, or anything else?
I think it's a hard truth. Discovery is not a challenge at all. So we know that secrets exist in applications which got embedded in various mechanisms. And they've also accumulated over the decades. No one actually knows on who owns these anymore, right? And then ownership is definitely a messy problem to solve. So, and on top of it, now AI agents are becoming the next frontier because they just don't need to authenticate. They will reason, they will invoke other tools, and they chain the actions, as you said. And because the behavior is so dynamic, any of the traditional identity ways will almost be incompatible for us to get a governance view of it. So, one, in terms of, I would say, ownership, and two, in terms of the revocation play. So, what if we find secrets, we have found the ownership? How quickly can we revoke it that if it is not needed? So, I think that is where the challenge is, and that is what is need to be governed from governance perspective in a more rigorous way.
Thank you for that. And to also present to the audience a tangible takeaway of sorts, what would be the first two steps or controls that give disproportionate return in first 90 days if someone is focusing on moving from securing humans to securing identities?
I think this is also something that exists in our industry as a very legacy problem, having an inventory of things. Even if we have an inventory, how up to date it is. And it applies not just to assets, to the identities as well. The first thing is to establish an inventory, specifically an identity inventory. And then you can start looking into the governance mechanism. If you know what is there, then you can apply next steps on it. And the second step I would say, is to automate as much as possible on various aspects in avoiding hard-coded credentials getting into the software or applications, and having a mechanism to rotate the secrets that gets embedded in various ways or being used in a firm. These two actions, I would say, will eliminate this huge amount of risk that exists for firms in terms of managing what needs to be secured.
And further moving on similar and allied lines, recently Gartner made identity for AI agents one of its top trends for 2026. And it predicts that by 2028, a quarter of enterprise breaches will trace back to AI agent abuse. Now, an AI agent isn't a static service account. It can chain actions, call tools, and make decisions at machine speed. What fundamentally breaks about digital IAM when the identity on the other end can reason and act rather than just authenticate.
I think this would apply not just to IAM in other areas as well, but explicitly on the IAM, we can think of it as, I would say, with an analogy, right? So assume for the traditional IAM, it is like using a train track and a train. So you exactly know the path the rails would be laid out, where the train would start, where the train would go. But introducing agentic AI is completely off the track, off the road. It knows the source, it knows the destination, and it will figure out its own path to get there, and you will not have enough, I would say, visibility on how that, I would say, path tracing would happen. So to put it fundamentally, I am in the traditional way is very, very deterministic. The answer is binary. You know yes or no. And you know if one has a permission to do, is if an individual or a non-human ID has a permission to read file X or not. So those things you would know. But AI introduces this probabilistic execution, right? There is no hard coded line or path or a script it would follow. It analyzes the data, it arrives at the decision, it takes the actions, and it will decide its own. So I think that is what is the shift that one has to be really cognizant about, because it's very, very unpredictable.
So, in my own AI governance work, I'm building controls aligned to ISO 42001. But that standard doesn't tell you how to issue, scope, and revoke an identity for an autonomous agent. From your side, where does the management system layer end and the hard identity and access layer have to take over? And I'm just curious to know how you bridging or how can one bridge that gap at a bigger scale?
I would say both play equally important role. So the ISO 42001 principles that you spoke about offers you the control plane to get started. But it stops there. It does not get into the data plane. So identity systems actually will help you to have that enforcement on the play. So it determines whether an agent can do something or not do something. What can it actually do, right? So in a large scale, it is this integrated work or the integration at the implementation level and the governance level that will actually come to play. The bridge starts when you start looking at the AI agents exactly like high risk human contractors, right? The IAM layer will start enforcing things. It can help you do a lot of things, but then you will have to make sure that for any AI agent, there is no longer session that you would permit it to run. The session keys has to be really empirical. And also you should limit the scope on what it can do. You should limit the context on how it can be used. So the bridge is to not just work independently, but in an integrated ecosystem, understanding where, how, basically the five whys, right? Who did what when. You should be able to relate it with all the infra related layers as well as app related layers.
Pivoting a little to the code side of it, Black Duck's 2026 analysis found open source in 98% of code bases, with the average number of vulnerabilities per code base jumping 107% in a single year. For a board briefing, how can you or one make them feel that nearly all of the code they shape is in effect borrowed?
So, if you actually think about it, everyone writes software within the firm, but not entirely written within the firm itself, right? There are a lot of assembling of the software that happens in a global ecosystem. So, there's always dependency on a vendor or a licensed software or an open source software. So, the board would probably need answers for three things. One, what are the most material risks that they need to be aware of, and are we getting better with it, or are we going towards the worst side of it, and how resilient will we be to run our business if something fails, right? So from an identity perspective, I would say instead of offering a metrics, which says how many privileged identities that we have would not help, but specifically telling how many of these identities are not having any accountable owner would actually help. So I think that is where it would start resonating and helping them to have a focus on what needs to be done specifically in the areas where the exposure is needed.
So Sonatype counted 454,000 plus new malicious open source packages in 2025, including the first self-replicating worm of its kind. How has the shift from accidentally buggy to deliberately weaponized open source changed what you require for engineering teams?
So traditionally, I would say, or historically, the supply chain mechanisms in terms of the defense was to find the vulnerabilities and then look out opportunities on how those can get fixed, right? Today, it is not like that. Today, I would say attackers are actively poisoning, and they leverage dependency confusion, and they offer malicious updates. All that is in play. So we need to move from the reactive way of scanning and fixing into proactive way of looking at things. And for a developer or an engineer, it is making sure that the pipeline is gated in right mechanisms all through from start. When they start coding, can we have the right gates in place? And can the repo have the right libraries, which is cryptographically verified? It is analyzed not to have any malicious content, and it is approved as well. And while the development happens, what are the gates that will help us to avoid bringing in the risk the developer would bring in during the developer? So, and offering mechanisms to help remediate then and there. I feel those are few things that is really important for us to avoid having the right mechanisms to bring in any of these open source softwares into the.
And I have to bring my own experience into this because the contrast genuinely puzzles me. In my third party risk world, we lifted vendor security maturity by 357%. But those were commercial vendors with contracts and someone to call. Open source has no vendors, no SLA, no one to escalate to. From your vantage point and of course open SSF experience, is SBOM the missing contract? Or is the questionnaire and attestation model just the wrong mental model for code maintained by volunteers?
I would say asking someone to complete a questionnaire which is having 200 questions and then understanding where do they stand is no longer good at all. So we definitely have to pivot away from it. It may help in certain areas, but definitely can't rely on it because it is just what one would feel comfortable in giving the response and what the individual has an experience on responding, right? So the pivot should be on the SPOM side for any software that is getting developed, but it is not a contract. It is just a list of things that a software would contain. More and more on how this bombs are used, S bombs are used. It could be not just S bomb, right? It could be C bomb, it could be AI bomb. Any bill of material, if it is being used in real time to understand on the consumption governance, I think it would be more effective. And more, I would say, implementing or bringing in controls that can help us understand where did this start, what are the libraries that are there, and where has it been built, where has it been deployed, where is it actually running, can we trace it back? If a malicious library has to be found, can we really go to that point and help identify and take action? That is what is going to matter most. And SBOM would be, I would say, a foundational aspect for us to achieve there, to understand where things are and how to act on it when something that we will have to find out for an incident to help on.
And to take this one step further, like you have worked on aligning SBOMs, SLSA, and scorecards with legislation. Now, for a CISO or a security leader who hears SBOM and thinks another spreadsheet I'll never read, where does an SBOM genuinely reduce risk, and where is it compliance theater today, in your opinion?
So, as I said, I think SBOM is really definitely valuable. And because machines can use them, machines can read them, it can help us to bring in the traceability aspect. It can help us to faster our vulnerability response times. It can help us with the automated assurance aspects. And definitely, it cannot be just used as a checklist to meet a compliance or an auditor requirements, right? So the future definitely lies in bringing S bombs into integrated mechanisms all through the pipeline, and also integrating in some mechanisms to policy as code that will help us to understand where the controls are and how they are functioning end to end.
The EU Cyber Resilience Act, fully planned to be applied from December 2027. Sitting in India, serving a global firm, how should an Asia based security leader be reading the CRA right now? A wait and see, or the requirements are already flowing through my contracts?
Yeah, I think anyone who has presence here in India or across Asia geographies broadly has to understand that if they are working with any of the European entities or have sold to the European market, this is something that they will have to comply with. And they really have to revisit and restructure their current criteria on various procurement processes as well. And if your software cannot provide a cryptographically verified SBOM, it cannot adhere and showcase the secure by design aspects, then I think it would not fly. December 2027 is not too far away. It would just be at the doorstep and it will be very difficult to comply.
So in my governance work, I have built board dashboards with 20 plus KPIs and KRIs. And the lesson was the board wanted the three that change a decision, not 20. For something as abstract as non-human identity exposure or supply chain risk thing that we spoke of, what's that one metric that actually lands with the board and unlocks budget?
I think it has to be on the same three basic aspects I shared earlier. One, what is the material risk? Are we getting better or worse with it? And how resilient will we be if anything fails, right? So, one thing that definitely hits me is the mean time to contain an unmanaged identity exposure. So, if we are able to show that there's an identity and we are not able to manage it and it is causing an exposure, what is the time we will take to address it, right? So, assume an attacker steals an employee's password today and we cannot detect, and we can actually detect it and lock it down in 6 minutes. But if an identity is leaked, and that is something an AI agent is used, which we will not be able to trace, and it takes us around 14 days to figure it out, then this is an operational blindness, and which we can bring down to an hour. I think that is how the budget needs to be asked with the senior leadership team.
And to further add to the complexities, as DPDP rules landed in late 2025 with penalties up to 250 crore for inadequacies, inadequate safeguards on full enforcement planned around May 2027. In my DPDPA work, the hardest part isn't the rule. It's mapping personal data across systems no one fully owns. For someone serving as a security leader at an enterprise or a bigger institution, global institution, how should they be sequencing DPDP readiness? And does the machine identity problem make that data mapping even harder?
Yeah, I think the sequence is very clear. I think one should start with the readiness initiatives. Step one is to make sure to lock down on the service to service data accesses where it is possible. And then, if there is a machine identity involved that cannot be audited or justified, make sure that the reason is clearly documented, and programmatically we have mechanisms to deny the access. So that's how it has to be addressed. Fundamentally, I would say the principles like secure by default, secure by design, privacy by default, privacy by design is way to go about to strategize and have it in force. And all of them should have the bottom line of having deny by default as a rule. Whether it is human or non-human identity doesn't matter. Delay by default is what will help them achieve it.
Thank you for that. And steering a little on the human side of this discussion, the global workforce gap sits at nearly 4.8 million, with women at roughly 22% of the profession. You had founded the Cyber Club and mentored through InfoSec Girls and Vinja. Right? As we automate more of the SOC, what's the human skill you are now hiring or mentoring for that? Something that we weren't doing in the past 3 to 5 years.
I would probably choose individuals who have got right attitude. That would be my first criteria. So, and we have seen historically as well, there are so many new technologies that come in, and one has to really adapt and learn them as these new techs come our way and see how we can apply our skills in solving a business problem. So, upskilling, having that mindset to upskill themselves as and when new things come, and figuring out how do we apply to solve a problem at hand is the skill I would look out for. And we also need people who really are accountable and then are, I would say, understand the complex engineering problems, can also relate things with some patterns. And now, more and more, because of the AI that we have at our use, we should probably look for identifying these behavioral patterns that would really help us to solve the problem. So, skill at the, I would say, foundational aspects, I would really look for someone who's got very good attitude and is open to learn and apply those skills to solve a business problem.
You came up through engineering, cryptography, and architecture, then moved into policy and the boardroom. You have written that policy isn't just for policy professionals. For a brilliant engineer who thinks policy isn't for me, what convinced you to lean in?
That's an interesting question. So I would say, as an engineer, I also thought that policy was boring and bureaucratic red tape. But then I've realized over a period of time that it is not just paperwork, right? Policy is actually architecture, which is expressed in words. And I have learned that when I use that as code, when policy as code is available in large scale, they actually help shape up the engineering decision. And it also help in the planning of the right strategy, and it will help enable the business growth as well. So it's completely, I would say, a pivot in what I've learned and experienced in looking into the policies at this point.
Thank you for that very candid response. So, to the women in security listening right now, who like one piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you were starting out?
I would say they should just not wait for someone to handhold or support, right? Just go when an opportunity is come in and then perform your best in everything that's in front of you. And this is also for all the allies, right? Without that, I believe it is very difficult for men to really grow and make best use of opportunities that come in front of them. And so they have to realize that they're just not occupying a seat in firm as an employee, and they have to realize that they are actively building something that is going to help out the business in many ways, and they are setting an example for next generation of women who will probably walk through the same steps as well. So they own that once they are in any form of work, they are doing good for themselves, and they are also setting a good image and a path that the new generations to come can follow and accomplish various things in work environment.
Thank you so much to yourself as well, leading from the front and being an inspiration for so many around. I mean, irrespective of the gender. So I appreciate that. And that kind of also brings us to the signature rapid fire round. A couple of quick questions coming your way, starting with one board metric that you would like to delete forever.
I would say rather than showing the number of attacks that were blocked, the count of number of patches. I think those things means nothing.
Your single most unpopular opinion in security?
Cybersecurity is a blocker to control Centric is something I feel is very unpopular.
If you could finish this sentence for me, 5 years, password will be,
Say invisible.
and one book or talk or framework every security leader or every enthusiast or practitioner or aspirant should consume, in your opinion.
So my source for understanding various things within the cyber has been NIST. So I would recommend leveraging all the documentation NIST offers. And specifically at this point of time, I would say NIST CSF would be of lot of help.
Great. Thank you so much, Shobha, once again for your time. So before we wrap up this podcast, any closing words of wisdom for the listeners or for the
So I
audience?
don't know if I have to call it as wisdom, but I would say identity is no longer just an access problem, right? It is becoming the nervous system in the digital world. We really have to have the right mechanisms to understand both human and non-human identities and all the privileges and access that it would have. And agentic world is taking us to new way of doing things and new with speed as well. So I think it makes us really, I would say, as leaders, take right decisions and have right mechanisms in place. Ultimately, all of us are here to enable the business. That is what we will have to keep in mind.
Thank you so much once again, Shobha. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure for having you on CISO Chair podcast. I cannot thank you enough, and a lot of appreciation for the kind gesture and for all your useful inputs on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ashish. I equally enjoyed sharing my perspectives in this podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for joining CISO Chair. Subscribe for global perspectives and bold conversations on cybersecurity. Stay secure, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.